Okay, guys, so today I will be reading my favorite Kanej book scenes. Kanej is the ship name of Kaz Brecker, and Inej, I forgot her last name, I'll be honest. But that's their ship name. So I'm going to be reading my favorite book scenes. Because why not? Because they're iconic. So, hold on. I gotta find the page. Okay, first things first, we gotta remember the awesome line of Kaz found Inej unerringly in a crowd, which I think I'm saying correctly. I just love that line. But the next favorite scene is in chapter 4, page 66. You're not in the business of giving gifts. What's the job? An impossible job, near certain death, terrible odds, but should we scrape it? He paused on the buttons of his waistcoat, his look distant, almost dreamy. It was rare that she heard such excitement in his raspy voice. Should we scrape it? She prompted. He grinned at her, his smile sudden and jarring as a thunderclap, his eyes near the near black of bitter coffee. We'll be kings and queens, Inej. Kings and queens. She said, non-committedly, pretending to examine one of her knives, determined to ignore that grin. Kaz was not a gritty boy smiling and making future plans with her. He was a dangerous player who was always working an angle. Always, she reminded herself firmly. Inej kept her eyes averted, shuffling a stack of papers into a pile on the desk as Kaz stripped out of his vest and shirt. She wasn't sure if she was flattered or insulted that he didn't seem to give a second thought to her presence. How long will we be gone? She asked, darting a glance at him through the open doorway. He was corded muscles, scars, but only 2 tattoos, the Dreg's crow and a cup on his forearm, and above it a black R on his bicep. She never asked him what it meant. It was his hands that drew her attention as he shucked off his leather gloves and dipped a cloth in the wash bin. He only ever removed them in these chambers, and as far as she knew, only in front of her. Whatever affliction he might be hiding, she could see no sign of it, only slender lockpicks fingers and a shiny rope of scar tissue from some long-ago street fight. A few weeks, maybe a month, he said as he ran the wet cloth under his arms and the hard planes of his chest, water trickling down his torso. For saint's sake, Inej thought as her cheeks heated. She'd lost most of her modesty during her time with the menagerie, but really there were limits. What would Kaz say if she suddenly stripped down and started washing herself in front of him? He'd probably tell me not to drip on the desk, she thought with a scowl. Okay, the next scene is page 68. It won't happen again, he promised. Kaz pulled on a clean pair of gloves, snapped up his walking stick, and headed out the door. I'll be back in a few hours. Move the decapple we lifted from Van Eck's house to the vault. I think it's rolled up under my bed. Oh, and put in an order for a new hat. Please. Kaz heaved a sigh as he braced himself for 3 painful flights of stairs. He looked over his shoulder and said, Please, my darling Inej, treasure of my heart, won't you do me the honor of acquiring me a new hat? Inej cast a meaningful glance at his cane. Have a long trip down, she said, then leapt onto the banister, sliding from one flight to the next, slick as butter in a pan. Okay, this is like 2 whole pages. So, chapter 12, 153. Okay. She slid the dagger from the sheath at her wrist. In the barrel, a blade this sharp was known as kine steel. It meant a quick death, better that than torture at the mercy of the black tips or the razor goals. May the saints receive me. She pressed the tip beneath her breast, between her ribs, an arrow to her heart. Then a hand gripped her wrist painfully, forcing her to drop the blade. Not just yet, Inej. The rasp of stone on stone. Her eyes flew open. Kaz. He bundled her into his arms and leapt down from the crates, landing roughly, his bad leg buckling. She moaned as they hit the ground. Did we win? I'm here, aren't I? He must be running. Her body jounced painfully against his chest with every lurching step. He couldn't carry her and use his cane. I don't want to die. I'll do my best to make other arrangements for you. She closed her eyes. Keep talking, Wraith. Don't slip away from me. That wasn't emotion full enough. Sorry. But it's what I do best. He clutched her tighter. Just make it to the schooner. Open your damn eyes, Inej. She tried. Her vision was blurring, but she could make out a pale, tiny, shiny scar on Kaz's neck, right beneath his jaw. She remembered the first time she'd seen him at the menagerie. He paid Tante Helene information. He paid Tante Helene for information, stock tips, political pillow talk, anything the menagerie's clients blabbed about when drunk or giddy on bliss. He never visited Helene's girls, though plenty would have been happy to take him up to their rooms. They claimed he gave them the shivers, that his hands were permanently stained with blood beneath those black gloves. But she'd recognized the eagerness in their voices and the way they tracked him with their eyes. One night, as he'd passed her in the parlor, she'd done a foolish thing, a reckless thing. I can help you, she whispered. He'd glanced at her, then proceeded on his way, as if she'd said nothing at all. The next morning, she'd been called to Tante Helene's parlor. She'd been sure another beating was coming, or worse. But instead, Kazbrecher had been standing there, leaning on his crow's head cane, waiting to change her life. I can help you, she said now. Help me with what? She couldn't remember. There was something she was supposed to tell him. It didn't matter anymore. Talk to me, Wraith. You came back for me. I protect my investments. Investments. I'm glad I'm bleeding all over your shirt. I'll put it on your tab. Now she remembered. He owed her an apology. Say you're sorry. For what? Just say it. She didn't hear his reply. The world had grown very dark indeed. Now, this scene doesn't directly include Inej, but it's when he rips out Umin's eyeball. So, we're gonna read it. Now Helvar and Jesper dragged Umin over to the rail, his hands bound. Stand him up. With one huge hand, Helvar hauled Umin to his feet. Umin grinned, his thatch of coarse white hair flat against his wide forehead. Why don't you tell me what brought so many black tips out in force tonight, Kaz said. We owed you. A public brawl with guns out and 30 men packing? I don't think so. Umin snickered. Giels doesn't like being bested. I could fit Giel's brain in the toe of my boot, and Big Bolliger was his only source inside the dregs. Maybe he... Kaz interrupted him. I want you to think real careful now, Umin. Giels probably thinks you're dead, so there are no rules of barter here. I can do what I want with you. Umin spat in his face. Kaz took a handkerchief from his coat pocket and carefully wiped his face clean. He thought of Inej lying still on the table, her slight weight in his arms. Hold him, he told Jesper and the Fjedin. Kaz flicked his coat sleeve and an oyster-shucking knife appeared in his hand. At any given time, he had at least 2 knives stashed somewhere in his clothes. He didn't even count this one, really. A tidy, wicked little blade. He made a neat slash across Umin's eye, brow to cheekbone, and before Umin could draw breath to cry out, he made a second cut in the opposite direction. A nearly perfect X. Now Umin was screaming. Kaz wiped the knife clean, returned it to his sleeve, and drove his fingers into Umin's eye socket. He shrieked and twitched as Kaz yanked out his eyeball, its base trailing a bloody root. Blood gushed over his face. Kaz heard Wyland retching. He tossed the eyeball overboard and jammed his spit-soaked handkerchief into the socket where Umin's eye had been. Then he grabbed Umin's jaw, his gloves leaving red smears on the enforcer's chin. His actions were smooth, precise, as if he were dealing cards at the Crow Club or picking an easy lock. But his rage felt hot and mad and unfamiliar. Something within him had torn loose. Listen to me, he hissed. His face inches from Umin's eye. You have two choices. You tell me what I want to know, and we drop you at your next port, with your pockets full of enough coin to get you sewn up and buy you passage back to Kirch. Or I take the other eye and repeat this conversation with a blind man. It was just a job, babbled Uman. Gil's got 5,000 Kruga to bring the black tips out in force. We pulled in some razor gulls too. Then why not more men? Why not double your odds? You were supposed to be on the boat when it blew. We were just supposed to take care of the stragglers. Who hired you? Uman wavered, sucking on his lip, snot running from his nose. Don't make me ask again, Uman, Kaz said quietly. Whoever it was can't protect you now. He'll kill me, and I'll make you wish for death, so you have to weigh those options. Pekka Rollins, Uman sobbed. It was Pekka Rollins. Sorry, we had to be dramatic. Even through his own shock, Kaz registered the effect of the name on Jesper and Wylan. Helvar didn't know enough to be intimidated. Saints, groaned Jesper. We are so screwed. Is Rollins leading the crew himself? Kaz asked Uman. What crew? To Fieda. I don't know about no crew. We were just supposed to stop you from getting out of the harbor. I see. I need a medic. Can you take me to a medic now? Of course, said Kaz. Right this way. He took Uman by the lapels and hoisted him off his feet, bracing his body against the railing. I told you what you wanted, Uman screamed, struggling. I did what you asked. Despite Uman's knobby build, he was deceptively strong, farm strong like Jesper. He'd probably grown up in the fields. Kaz leaned in so that no one else could hear it when he said, My wraith would counsel mercy, but thanks to you, she's not here to plead your case. Without another word, he tipped Uman into the sea. No! Wylan shouted, leaning forward over the railing, his face pale, stunned, eyes tracking Uman in the waves. The enforcer's pleas were still audible as his maimed face faded from view. Alright, chapter 18, page 204. So, we're going to start with, he needed to know she believed in him. But all she said was, I hear Pekka Rollins was the one gunning for us in the harbor. Kaz felt a huge surge of disappointment. So? I don't think I haven't noticed the way you go after him, Kaz. He's just another boss, one more barrel thug. No, he isn't. When you go after other gangs, it's business, but with Pekka Rollins, it's personal. Later, he wasn't sure why he said it. He'd never told anyone, never spoken the words aloud. But now Kaz kept his eyes on the sails above them and said, Pekka Rollins killed my brother. Kaz does not have my voice, though, so sorry. He didn't have to see Inej's face to sense her shock. You had a brother? I had a lot of things, he muttered. I'm sorry. Had he wanted her sympathy? Was that why he told her? Kaz, she hesitated. What would she do now? Try to lay a comforting hand on his arm? Tell him she understood? I'll pray for him, Inej said, for peace in the next world, if not in this one. He turned his head. They were sitting close together, their shoulders nearly touching. Her eyes were so brown they were almost black, and for once her hair was down. She always wore it tied back in a ruthlessly tight coil. Even the idea of being this near someone should have set his skin crawling. Instead he thought, what happens if I move closer? I don't want your prayers, he said. What do you want then? The old answers came easily to mind. Money, vengeance, Geordie's voice in my head silenced forever. But a different reply roared to life inside him, loud, insistent, and unwelcome. You, Inej, you. He shrugged and turned away, to die buried under the weight of my own gold. Inej sighed. Then I'll pray you get all you ask for. More prayers, he asked. And what do you want, Wraith? To turn my back on Ketterdam and never hear that name again. Good. He'd need to find a new spider, but he'd be rid of this distraction. Your share of 30 million Kruga can grant you that wish. He pushed to his feet. So save your prayers for good weather and stupid guards. Just leave me out of it. Dun dun dun. So I'm sure there's great Kanej scenes in between this chapter and the chapter we just read, but these were the scenes I kind of remembered off the top of my head. So this is like chapter 42, page 434, like the very end of the book. Inej turned to go. Kaz seized her hand, keeping it on the rail. He didn't look at her. "Stay," he said, his voice rough stone. "Stay in Ketterdam. Stay with me." She looked down at his gloved hand clutching hers. Everything in her wanted to say yes, but she would not settle for so little, not after all she'd been through. What would be the point? He took a breath. "I want you to stay. I want you to... I want you." "You want me?" She turned the words over. Gently, she squeezed his hand. "And how will you have me, Kaz?" He looked at her then, eyes fierce, mouth set. It was the face he wore when he was fighting. "How will you have me?" she repeated. "Fully clothed, gloves on, your head turned away so our lips can never touch." He released her hand, his shoulders bunching, his gaze angry and ashamed as he turned his face to the sea. Maybe it was because his back was to her that she could finally speak the words. "I will have you without armor, Kazbrecker, or I will not have you at all." "Speak," she begged silently. "Give me a reason to stay." For all his selfishness and cruelty, Kaz was still the boy who had saved her. She wanted to believe he was worth saving too. The sails creaked, the clouds parted for the moon, then gathered back around her. Inej left Kaz with the wind howling and dawn still a long while away. So anyway, those are my favorites from book 1, off the top of my head. Now we move on to book 2. Okay, we gotta mention the last scene of the book. "I'm going to invent a new trick," Cass said. "One Vanek will never forget." He turned to the others. If he could have gone after Inej alone, he would have. But not even he could pull that off. "I'll need the right crew." Wylane got to his feet. "For the Wraith." Desper followed, still not meeting Kaz's eyes. "For Inej," he said, quietly. Matthias gave a single sharp nod. Inej had wanted Kaz to become someone else, a better person, a gentler thief. But that boy had no place here. That boy ended up starving in an alley. He ended up dead. That boy couldn't get her back. "I'm going to get my money," Kaz vowed, "and I'm going to get my girl." Inej could never be his, not really, but he would find a way to give her the freedom he'd promised her so long ago. Dirty hands had come to see the rough work done.